Well, Africa was able to achieve a major milestone at the recent United Nations General Assembly, where two extra seats were created for the continent in the UN Security Council. But then the question is, what really is the implication of this development, given the fact that the seat was offered or the seats were offered without veto power? So, what is the implication of this within the African geopolitical landscape? Well, Vin-Martin is here in the studio. He is a veteran diplomatic correspondent. He joins us to expand more on this development. Good morning, Vin-Martin.
Yeah, good morning, Chigi.
Thank
My
you so
pleasure to be
much.
here.
Thank you so much for joining us this morning. So let's talk United Nations. What exactly is the United Nations? We do know that they were formed, or it was formed in 1945, following the end of the Second World War. But what exactly is the implication of the United Nations within Africa, and what is their role in Africa and, of course, elsewhere?
Okay, I'd like to just describe the United Nations in a way that everyone will understand it.
Okay.
United Nations is an association, let me use that simple word, of nations. It is a coming together of different nations. So that is basically what it is. Just like any other kind of organization that brings people of either diverse interests and what have you. But like you rightly pointed out, the United Nations came because of a need, an effort the world had started trying to bring member states together. It wasn't something that started in 1945. It has
Okay.
started as long as there were conflicts in the world. You saw a number of nations and a number of statesmen thought that if there was an organization that brought together nations, maybe it would bring down the number of
Conflicts,
conflicts, the
international
number of
conflicts.
differences, the number of quarrels, and all that. I mean, the First World War and the Second World War were not the only wars that were fought in this world, but these were big wars that eventually affected and, you know, had almost everybody in the world as at that time feeling the impact of what was going on. So earlier during the First World War, after the First World War, the statesmen and nations wanted to come together. They started what they called the League
Of
of
nations, okay.
Nations, you know. And the League of Nations tried to, bring them together, resolve issues. Well, that was what they used to resolve the First World War, the League of Nations, which came into place, I think, about the 10th of January 1920.
Okay.
But by the time the Second World War,
But at this point, the League of Nations comprise of how many countries now?
I can't tell exactly how many nations, but it was a number of frontline nations as at that time that were pushing it. And they had started, of course, they gave it a name, they signed some documents and what have you, and it was known as the League of Nations. But by the Second World War, somehow, it couldn't play that role that they had wanted it to play even when it came into being. And there was another effort to bring a more relevant, a more
Robust.
robust, a more practical, a kind of organization that would be stronger, that would be more effective than what the League of Nations was able to do. And that was why on the 25th of April 1945, they began a conference in San Francisco where they, at that time, there were about 51 countries that attended that.
The inaugural
that
conference.
yeah,
Okay.
but only 50 signed.
Why is that?
because Poland could not sign. Poland signed about 2 months
Okay.
after, you know. So, and when it was done, there was a charter, you know, an international, what you could call an international treaty, which codified the basic tenets of international relations, from sovereign equality of states to prohibition of the use of force in any manner inconsistent with the purposes of the United Nations. You know, that charter also mandated the UN and its members to maintain, watch my words, maintain international peace and security, uphold international law, achieve high standards of living for their citizens. United Nations was not just about nation and nation. They were also concerned about what happened internally, you know. And, you know, it mandated states and member states to address economic, social, health, and related problems in their individual nations. They were also concerned about promoting, you know, universal respect and observance of human rights
The
and
scope
fundamental
seems
freedoms.
like it's a very wide scope.
It was a big document.
So
It was about how many chapters? I can't remember. It was a big document. I'm just trying to summarize.
Okay.
You know, so these were some of the key things. You know, there wasn't supposed to be gender bias. People were not going to be treated, but because they were from Nigeria, or because they were black, or because they were female, or because they used a particular language, or because of their religion. So, the founding fathers of the United Nations wanted a peaceful world, a prosperous world, a world where even citizens of individual member countries will be respected and protected.
As contained in the charter.
As contained in the charter. It's a big, big document.
Okay, so now you've mentioned...
if we want to discuss the charter,
it's a whole new...
1 week of your program will not...
It's a whole new lecture. All right, so you've mentioned humanitarian aid, you've mentioned peacekeeping, you've mentioned standard of living, violence against or violation of human rights. You've mentioned quite a lot in terms of the scope of the UN. Now, my question is, what are their machineries, you know, in place to ensure that they're able to, you know, enforce authority or over these you know, scopes in different countries, different member countries?
Okay. It's important to talk about an arm of the United Nations, which is very key to what happens at the United Nations. Among these 51 members at that time, I think they're about 190 something now.
I think 193
or thereabouts. Yes. That's the membership now. But as at that time, among those 51 nations, they designated 5 members as permanent members.
What was the criteria for this designation?
I think it was power. Because if you go back, you know, I don't want to go back so much because it's not the history we're talking about this morning. But you know that as that war was winding down, the
Second World War now.
The Second World War. They were the people that were like those that had won. And there were those that were defeated, so to say. But then those powerful ones were having meetings, even when they were trying to share the spoils of war. Britain, United States, Russia.
China.
No, China was not really there at that time.
Okay, at that time.
No, in terms of the powers that really delivered.
After the Second World War.
So they were already, so by the time this meeting was going on, there were 5 strong nations. France, China, United Kingdom, Soviet Union.
Russia? Or they were the Soviet Union?
Yeah, they were called
the Soviet Union.
The Soviet Union at that time. Russia, China, UK, US, and France. They were the permanent members. And they had what they called veto powers. So if the rest, even as at now that is expanded to 193 members, if they came to any conclusion and one nation didn't agree to the nation will veto.
Which leaves us wondering, given the fact that these 5 countries were the world powers, powers then, so
At that time, yeah.
it was probably correct, politically correct to give them those 5 seats.
I
But
don't
given
know.
the fact that things have so changed in terms of geopolitical,
Interests
playouts and
and all that.
interest, shouldn't it be reviewed? Shouldn't there be has there been a
That
reform
that
of
has
some
been
sort?
that has been on the front burner of so many discussions at the United every year for as long as I remember. That comes up. Africa is agitating for a permanent seat. Brazil is agitating for a permanent seat.
India should
India
agitate
is
too.
agitating. So in every geopolitical zone, one nation or two will be agitating to be that member. But somehow it has never really worked. I don't know why. But if you ask me, my personal opinion is probably the superpowers would not want that to happen because it will whittle down their
to
own
weaken
power.
their strength.
To weaken their strength. Because when you look at the United Nations, what is the biggest challenge? For me, the biggest challenge in the United Nations is the interests of the superpowers or the permanent members. So something is happening, an ally of the United States is being hammered. And then the United States vetoes it.
Take, for instance, what's happening in the Middle East.
Yes.
Does it have anything to do with this arrangement? Yeah.
Well, I also think that the non-resolution of that crisis and so many other crises could be attributed to the politics in the Security Council, where you have these 5 permanent members.
Because it seems as though some people will do some things, some countries will get a pat on the back, another country does almost the same thing. Or
So
even,
it's,
and the country gets a hammer. So
a lot of experts, a lot of scholars have said that arrangement has outlived its usefulness, number one. Number two, a lot of experts and scholars are saying that is actually bogging down the United Nations. Because even inside between those 5 members, permanent members, there's a division, a very clear-cut division. So there is Russia and China here, and there is France, United Kingdom, and United States on the other side. So anything that the allies of Russia, like North Korea, like China, or any of those countries that are aligned to their interests,
does it have anything to do with the fact that
they will veto it.
Does it have anything, the alignment, does it have anything to do with the fact that these others are coming from a socialist background while these other ones are coming from a capitalist background?
Because, we had a bipolar world where you had the group with the USSR, not Russia. Russia was a later day thing. It used to be Russia, it became USSR, and it came back to Russia. So then you, of course, you remember there was this military grouping, the Warsaw Pact, which was the ones that were with with the USSR, Russia, and then you had NATO, the ones that were with the US. The UK and France, and a number of countries in Europe. So it has always been that. Even now in the post-Cold War era, you still see such alignments. Everybody knows they are traditional friends. When you see leaders talk and make speeches, they say our traditional allies. Because that's how politics works. Of course, we talk about permanent interests and not permanent enemies and whatever. But when you look at it, your friend is your friend. I mean, when you girls come together and then there's one you went to secondary school with, went to the university with, when everything happens, you still
Yes,
know,
align with that person.
align. So that is one of the problems that today, a big issue like Ukraine, a big issue like the Israel Gaza Gaza war, Palestine, or even the recent one that is trying to turn into something much bigger, the one with Hezbollah, it is very difficult to resolve these issues because of interests. The United Nations passes a resolution calling for ceasefire in Palestine or in Gaza, and the United Nations vetoes it because they think it's not in the interest of Israel. If you remember when we had the Syrian issue, when Syria was burning during the Arab Spring, you know, and the ISIS conflict, the ISIS problems at that time. A lot of things that the United Nations wanted to do, impose sanctions, take action against Syria, the USSR or Russia will veto it. So you find out that for me, it's like, let me give you an instance. What is happening in the world today is like you and Ada, the first son or the first
Daughter.
you and Ada, the first daughter, or you're the Opara, the first
son
in your family. What happens is that you get successful before your siblings. At some point, you're carrying everybody. If there's going to be a party at home, the first child provided everything, took care of their parents, made decisions about those parents. And what Ada or the first son says is final. But you discover that as your siblings get older,
conflict,
and they are standing on their own, they start challenging your authority.
Sure.
They will tell you, no, but sister, you can't make all those decisions about our parents, about whether we are going to put a window in the house and all that, because they've come of age. So that's exactly what is happening at the United Nations. In 1945, there were just 50 members. Today, there are 193 members. And then
over 100%.
five nations have the big decisions to make. So these countries have come of age. Germany has moved away from its defeat in 1945 to be a big nation.
Now, it is said, history says that the reason why the UN came in was because the League of Nations failed in stopping the Second World War.
Yes, and there were so many problems.
Now, if this is true,
yes,
wouldn't you say the same thing has happened with the United Nations, given, not just pockets of, conflict, but wars, full-blown wars, they've been unable to handle?
I think there's a decline. I think there's some, they're not as strong as they used to be. But if you say, do away with it, what's the alternative? Where do you start?
Good question.
How do you do it? So, a lot of scholars, experts, diplomats are saying that there should be a reform at the United Nations. Because some of those, what are the goals of the United Nations? To maintain international peace and security, protect human rights, deliver humanitarian support sustainable development and climate change. These are part of the goals of the United. They're not living up to it. They're not living up to it. Look at the number of people that are dying in Gaza. Look at Ukraine. They are not able to resolve those issues. So a lot of people are saying there should be reforms. If you have done a project with the United Nations, there's a lot of conferences, there's a lot of workshops, there's a lot of research. We are saying that these things that they do with other people should be done by the United Nations itself. There should be a new self-appraisal. The United Nations and members should take a retreat and look at what has worked and what has not worked.
There's serious need for evaluation
because
of the United Nations.
Because all this, they're able to provide. Look at the General Assembly. Speaker after speaker, speaker after speaker was talking about the growing irrelevance of the United Nations. Yes, some of them will hinge it on what is happening. Israel's seeming disregard for resolutions of the United Nations. Russia's seeming disregard for resolutions of the United Nations.
And it all boils down to the
seeming
fact
regard,
that the UN is being, with the strength of the UN is being, because there should be punitive measures for countries that flout.
For God's sake,
UN
before now,
resolutions.
if a car flew the UN flag, it was untouchable. It's like when you are in war, you have a palm front or something to show.
Or a white flag.
Or a white flag. If you had a UN flag in a vehicle or in an area,
You're untouchable.
it's untouchable.
Wherever you are in
it's
the world.
untouchable. But today in Gaza, UN convoys are bombed. UN personnel are killed. And there are no repercussions.
All right, let's talk about the non-permanent seats. What's the arrangement, when it comes to non-permanent seats? We've been talking about the 5 permanent
It's
seats.
something that revolves. People lobby to be elected.
What's in it for them?
Well, it's also not every issue at the United Nations is as controversial as resolving wars.
Okay.
Even to bring development or bring funds to an area is also part of things discussed at the United. Don't forget, you have UNESCO, you have UNICEF, you have this, you have that,
Yes.
UNHCR.
IMF.
They are arms of the United Nations, where the fact that you're a permanent member, you can influence a lot of things.
Even without voting powers?
No, they have voting powers. It's not every issue at the United Nations that is vetoed.
Okay.
The other issues where conversations hold, and there's no big interest that nations start vetoing. It's when it gets tough that people just pull out their veto and throw it on the table. But the other issues that they have conversations, where do we cite a United Nations organization, headquarters, or create, you can influence this when you're a member of the United Nations Security Council without being a permanent member. So it also brings prestige. Countries like Nigeria have been there once, 2, 3 times in a very short space of time. There's some that have never been. It's actually a lobby. And some of those things are allocated to geopolitical zones. So your influence in your zone determines whether you get the position.
So 2 extra seats have been created for, the African continent. What is the implication for this? And then I think, let me rephrase that. And now Africa has 50-something countries, 54 countries. What would be the criteria of selecting the 2 countries, that will take those seats?
Negotiations, diplomacy, just like what I told you. Sometimes people campaign.
What's the role of the
votes.
AU in this whole arrangement?
I don't think they come together as AU and say we have a seat. They are 2 different organizations. They don't come as AU and say we have this seat, let's go and share it. It is countries will lobby other countries, vote for me now. This one will say, vote for me now. And if you're a very influential country, you can also use some small pressure to say, vote for me. And some nations might not support some nations because they think that maybe they're not as powerful or as influential, or that being there may not. But it's something that revolves around. Sometimes there might be this kind of system where, oh, you've gone, you were dead this time, maybe let this other person go, and all that and all that. But
wouldn't this bring some sort of conflict within the African states? So
No.
given our antecedents and the way we,
No. I don't think.
we
Nigeria,
scramble for
Nigeria
things.
may be unhappy that maybe South Africa did not support it. If it's going for, not just that, even when you have a member of your, someone from your country running for a position in a United Nations organization, you lobby. Countries get upset with each other. Why are you not supporting me? Why did you support the other person? I mean, we are talking about nations, but who are the nations? Are human beings.
Sure.
Human beings represent nations. So if me and you, we are pals, and I'm running for a position and you're not supporting, I can get upset. You know, and then wait for you the next time, you know, and all that. But I don't think it brings that kind of I don't think anybody has gone to war because somebody did not support them.
Yeah, maybe internal squabbles or
Yeah, there'll be, of
conflicts.
course, there'll be some beefs. Forgive me. This is a contemporary,
Yes.
what we hear our young people
Yes.
use these days between those countries.
Countries.
But I don't think it leads to
Any serious
any
conflict.
serious or over serious.
Okay, let's go back a little bit into history. 1994, the Rwandan genocide. What was the role of the UN? Because it seems as though there wasn't much intervention until, you know, the massacre, you know, took its full, you know, took full circle. So what did the UN do, seeing that they are there to enable, you know, international peace, you know, humanitarian rights? But what took them so long?
Sometimes there's a conflict. Sometimes there's a conflict. And I'll try to explain about respect for the internal affairs of a nation.
Could you expound on that?
No, what I mean is the UN, as big as it is, there's some things the UN cannot just come and intervene in Nigeria. We have a sovereign nation. We have a leadership. We have a government. So you find out that sometimes there's that conflict where the UN is just sitting and watching what's going on in a nation.
Well, did the same thing play out with Syria?
Well, for a long time, if you follow the Syrian crisis, at the beginning of it, the Syrian government kept saying, this is internal affairs. We have people that are trying to unseat our government. And these are, what they're doing is probably treasonable felony. But after a while, because of pressure from interested parties, like the US, which was supporting the group, you know, US is like the world policeman who tries to say, oh, you are infringing on human rights of people and all that. With that kind of pressure, the country is saying, no, this is internal affairs. Other countries are saying, no, it's not internal affairs. Part of the charge of the United Nations is to protect the human rights of members of a country. So this one is getting out of hand. So a lot of times, let me use Nigeria, for instance, or let me use Kenya recently. During those riots, what you hear is the United Nations calling for, oh, parties should respect this, respect government should do that. They are watching. A lot of times when the UN intervenes, it's when a problem is getting out of hand.
Okay, so what are the rules of engagement, and when exactly would a problem get out of hand that will now necessitate the UN to, you know, come and...
there's no hard and fast rules. I think it depends on the situation. It got to a point where there was, in Rwanda, there was like a breakdown, there was nobody in charge.
Yes.
So those are times when the UN, most times that's when they come. It's like, UN is like, let me talk about like people in the medical profession. If you have malaria, you're not expected to go to the teaching hospital. You're supposed to go to
healthcare
facility in your community. It is when it's getting out of hand, they take you to a general hospital. And then it gets worse. They take you to the teaching hospital. And that's why, forgive me, that sometimes you hear people say, oh, don't take me to UNTHO or don't take me to this. People die a lot. No. The point is that people don't do anything until, people don't come there until the thing is so bad.
Exactly. They present very late.
Yes. They come to Park Lane when they don't know anything. They've tried everything in their village.
But then,
the analogy is, sometimes when these things happen, it's expected maybe they send the UN Secretary General sends an envoy to go and meet with the president and meet with the other party. So at that point, but it gets to a point they have no other choice. Either they send a peacekeeping mission or they bring countries together to go and try to make peace. So I think that sometimes delays it. Number two is that's why African countries and developing countries should be very careful about what they do to themselves. If what is happening in your country, most times, does not affect the global either economy or
Doesn't
is making
impact it in
somebody,
any
it
way.
does not impact it in any way, it's not making anybody uncomfortable, why would they be interested? They will leave you. You steal your own sauce. If you remember, Somalia, for instance, when I think it was Clinton that sent a U.S.
Envoy.
No,
Okay.
a force, and something went wrong, and they killed. I think a United States. They killed some United States soldiers, or in Lebanon many years ago, when they were part of the peacekeeping, UN peacekeeping something.
Okay.
I don't have the details. And then they killed. And then you hear Americans ask their leaders, why are we there? What is our interest? But if the Suez Canal, something happens and Egypt tries to block it because Egypt and say Israel or whatever were fighting, America and the rest of the world will take action the next minute. So sometimes what determines interest in international affairs is
very
a country's interest.
It's very profound you mentioned interest, because a school of thought has it that the reason why the delay what happened with Rwanda was because there was no special interest,
That's what I'm saying.
in Rwanda. But does that not flout, what they stand for?
Oh, of course, you could say it does. But for God's sake, if you're asking a nation to bring money they don't have, first of all, they'll check what is my interest in it. If there's a problem in Nigeria, what is it in it for us? If there's a problem in Nigeria, there'll be a conflagration, and then there'll be a refugee crisis. Countries in Benin, countries in Ghana, a country like Benin, Ghana, Niger, and other countries will be affected by a problem in Nigeria. So the international community might be interested. Oh, let's see how we can douse it. Let's see how we can stop it. Because how does it affect our trade and our exports? But if they don't have anything to lose, yeah. They will send a low quality diplomat to go and attend meetings. But if they have an interest, like let's look at what is happening in Gaza, in Israel.
Yeah.
They're interested. The Hezbollah leader was killed 2 nights ago or 2 days ago. They're interested. Everybody's talking about it because they know what can happen if that war expands. Every part of the world is going to be affected. So that's why when I see countries and things are going wrong and people are trying to I'll be laughing. And they say, I will do it and the US will come. They will not come. Except they have a reason to come. Like when we were very good with our oil. Nobody wanted anything to happen to Nigeria. But now that our oil is
and they have alternatives,
does not count, they can turn a blind eye.
Wow. So it goes to actually
when they went to defend Kuwait in Desert Storm and Iraq war.
The interest was the oil.
Yeah, because if they left Iraq was going to
invade,
undermine Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Kuwait, UAE, if they allowed them get away with what they did in Kuwait. And they knew it was going to be a big problem for the world. So, besides other reasons, because there are other reasons, they said no. We can't allow you to get away with invasion of Kuwait. Yeah. So there must be interest. There must be interest. For Africans, it doesn't look like we are going to get a permanent membership tomorrow or the day after. So what I think is that in a lot of issues that affect Africa, Africa should come together, maybe at the AU level.
Which was why I mentioned AU, yes.
Maybe at the AU level, and make decisions. How do we engage? I'll give you an instance.
Yes.
When Libya was invaded, when the United Nations passed those resolutions to go into Libya, a lot of African countries voted in favor. Countries like South Africa, I remember, voted in favor. A number of Africa, I can't remember how Nigeria voted then. But a lot of African countries voted in Libya. And without knowing it, gave the Western countries a blank check. So when they invaded Libya and started doing so many other things that the African countries did not like, they were hamstrung. They couldn't do
They
anything.
couldn't do anything.
Because they had voted at the United Nations
Hunger.
in favor of that resolution.
Now, I listened to an interview. This lady was an AU ambassador to United Nations. I think her name is Arikana Chiombori, something like that. So she was calling for a boycott. African leaders should actually boycott United Nations General Assemblies because, in her opinion, there was nothing for Africans in the United Nations. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't agree. I don't subscribe to such an extremist approach. What is, if we abandon, okay, that's like we boycott and maybe pause our membership or something.
Because recently some countries are actually agitating. They want to leave, but nobody has actually left yet.
But we still have some things we gain from the United Nations. Let me take UNICEF, for instance. UNICEF has been here in this country for so many years, doing a lot of work with children health, doing a lot of work with vaccination. Those are things we gain from the United Nations. There's been grants and what have you, addressing health issues, addressing educational issues, addressing environmental issues.
Economic issues. Actually.
There's so many things you gain.
Okay.
The political side, yes, there are problems in those political sides about the influence. What
yes, I was going to say, we gain all these things at what expense? Right? Because we mentioned these guys, they have their interests whenever they try to intervene. Now, all these grants, we get from them at what expense? And look at the economy of the African state.
Are they the ones that are messing up?
Directly, maybe not.
Are they the ones messing up the African continent?
Directly, maybe not. But
is the UN that the institution that said that forced our president to withdraw subsidy on fuel? Was the UN the organization that that is insisting that they are producing fuel in Nigeria, and then NNPC has to be a middleman, a go-between. At the end of the day, the cost increases.
Okay,
is it the UN that says that our leaders should not tar roads? Of course, there's corruption in the UN, a big issue. I forgot to say that. A big issue in the UN. But African countries and developing countries should stop blaming international organizations and go back to their countries and see how they can help themselves. The corruption in Africa and developing countries are so much that no matter what you do, those countries will never grow. I'm a scholar or a student of development studies. So countries should go back and stop blaming those people. I just gave you an example of Nigeria. In Myanmar, former Burma, which is a big issue in the world today, the military has seized the government, kicking out leaders as they like. Aung San Suu Kyi, a woman who won the presidency of Burma, has remained in prison, in and out of prison. This democracy challenge has affected the economy of Burma. It has affected the well-being of the people of Burma. Burma, which is Myanmar now, which the soldiers changed it to Myanmar, cannot grow according to its potentials. Is it the United Nations that did it? In Sudan, 2 army generals are dragging the nation into a war that has taken the lives of so many people. Sudan has not moved on in the past 2 to 3 years. Facilities, infrastructure in Khartoum, the capital, are being destroyed. Is it the United Nations? We can go on and on and on. Is the United Nations doing its job the way we want it? No. Is it declining in its relevance to relations between community of nations? No. Are they the best organized? No. But I'm also saying that nations should go and address their issues.
Okay, let's talk about African leaders before we let you go because time is gradually winding down. Recently, during this general meeting, UN general meeting, found African leaders go to speak on debt relief and forgiveness from their debts, and then these same African leaders are seen to live in so much opulence, as compared to their contemporaries, that stay in fairly affordable apartments and hotels. African leaders choose a lot of opulence, yet they were there to ask for debt relief. Do you think Africa has not actually been able to come together to understand what their singular interest is, just the way the West, the global West understands what their interest is as per Africa? Do you think our leaders are even close to understanding what our general interest is so that they can make their case at the UN?
Yeah, I like what you heard the story you told. You fly in with a private jet.
And with
a presidential jet.
And the number of people who go with you.
And all the people. And then you're asking a country like the United Kingdom to give you debt relief and help you, give you money and all that. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom does not have a private jet. He flies commercial BA. Oh, yeah. How does it work? You know, some diplomats from these Western countries, they've come to some state houses in Africa and developing countries. And they can't believe that people can live in such opulence. Meanwhile, they are the ones giving them money, giving them help. They are owing money. Go to number 10 Downing Street. Even from the outside, you know it is not it's not Buckingham Palace.
Sure.
So, like you said, we have to understand that this is a changing world. You know, when it was when we had the Cold War, it was a fight between the US
and Russia
and USSR.
Yeah, USSR.
So all you needed to get aid was to say, no, US is Muslim me. They want to remove me as head of state. Before you finish the sentence, Russia will come. And how can we help you? They pack money and give them. That's how you had Mobutu Sese Seko and all some of these leaders of that time. If it didn't work with Russia, you ran to the US. So it was a lot easier for them then. But now, yes, there's still that conflict, but not as it used to be. In those days, if China was doing the kind of thing it was doing in Africa now and in other developing countries, there would have been a big issue with countries like the US and the UK. But now, yes, we see everybody doing it subtly, lobbying and trying to break their own whatever. So those days are gone. A lot of countries are left to their own devices. Go and borrow as much money as you want, but it's your country that is going down.
But then they keep encouraging developing countries, especially from Africa, keep borrowing. You know, which was why I said, is there any direct relationship between Africa borrowing and then they imposing some economic policies?
For God's sake, let's bring it
very stringent economic policies just to recover their money.
Well, I don't know whether that's what they're doing. They could be doing that, but let's bring it down home.
Okay.
There are people who are money lenders in Enugu here, where we're having this program from. There are money lenders in your village. They want you to borrow money.
But it just doesn't make sense. When most of the loans are going bad, why do you keep encouraging them to come and take? There has to be a catch.
That's what I'm saying. They hear that somebody's father died. The next night, the money lender, oh, sorry, your father died, but in case you need anything, you can come and borrow. Our banks, Are you not owing them and they're giving you more money? So what I am saying is that nobody is being forced to borrow money. Okay, in Nigeria, we say we want our naira to be strong. In Nigeria, if you want to take out 550,000 naira from your personal account, your bank will say no. Give a check, which means you can't do business with raw cash of more than 500,000 naira as an individual. As a company, I think you may not do more than 5 million.
All right. All right.
But it's in this same Nigeria that you, Chigi,
Yeah.
if you have $1 million and you want to go to Aboki to change that money, nobody is asking you your name, where you got the money from,
Yeah.
who gave it to you,
Yeah.
what you're going to use the money to do.
Right.
Is it America that's telling us to behave like that?
Right. That's
Because if you go to
it's
America, you can't change $100 without bringing your passport, without bringing your ID card,
ID card.
without signing a document.
All right.
So there's a trail. So why in Nigeria, for instance, should Naira be regulated? We're almost cashless in Naira in Nigeria. And in dollars, our governors will get their location. Some governors will get their location. And the next morning is in Aboki. They change it and go and put it in a suitcase.
All right. That's the discussion for
So I'm
another
just
day.
saying that we in Africa, the corruption we are talking about is not just in Africa. It's in a lot of, Haiti is not an African country.
But they have a lot of African
Burma
ancestry.
is not an African country. Venezuela is not an African country. Corruption is everywhere. Challenges everywhere.
Right.
But nations must decide what they want to do for themselves.
Absolutely.
And not blame the United Nations
Absolutely.
or blame the Western countries.
Couldn't
That
agree
is
more. Your take on this.
my take on that.
Thank you so very much, Vin-Martin. Thank you for joining us to, bring a lot of light into this very topic and discussion. Thank you. All right. So we are going to go on a short break, and when we come back, New Day continues. Please stay with us.